Good morning, this is Michael Matthews at the Redmond Water Department, conducting training on hydrant inspections and the partnership between the Water Department and the Fire Department. First step, we're just going to go through the tools that we're going to be using. Of course, you got your hydrant wrench here. It's one of the most important tools. In addition, in this training, we'll go over, you're going to capture the pressure at each of the hydrants. So we go through, and so you're going to use this gauge combined with the adapter for hydrant side port. And finally, we're also going to use a valve key, get on the foot valve for the hydrant, and you'll want some tools to pop the lid of that valve. We use a hammer and a magnet. Hammer and a screwdriver works. All right, so the first step is we want to check the foot valve. This is the valve controlling the flow of water to the hydrant. Most of these are pretty stuck in the road there, so usually we bring a hammer out and we have to beat on a little bit. I've loosened this one up to avoid embarrassment. You hit that, once it pops up like that, you know it's loose. And again, we use the magnet to pull that off. Then you grab your valve key, put that in. You'll feel it once it gets on down in there. There's a valve. It's a square, and that's what this goes over the top of. So you'll have to, sometimes you got to search for it a little bit. They're not always center. Once you get on that, you want to make sure it's open, going left. Then we make sure that it still functions. Some of them are tighter than others, but we usually go a few turns. Make sure that we can loosen it up a little bit. And this is the way we're able to control flow to the hydrant if we have to do any repairs, which we likely will. So I won't go fully closed, but I will go until it loosens up a little bit. All right, so the main issues to look for in a foot valve, obviously if you can't find it, make note of that. Oftentimes they'll be asphalted right over. They might be in bushes. And if you come across one and you're unable to locate it, just make note of that and the water department can come out and find it. Oftentimes these valve cans will sustain damage. They'll be broken or a lid might be missing. Make note of that as well and we can get out to repair it. In addition, sometimes the valve can itself is full of water or mud and you're unable to actually get on that foot valve. And again, if that's the issue, make note of that and we can come out and clean that out. And of course, if you notice anything out of the ordinary, feel free to make a note of that as well and we can come by and have a look at it. So with the fire hydrant, after we've checked the foot valve, the first thing we're going to want to make sure to do is make sure that, to our best of our knowledge, it's off. Then after that, we're going to check each of the three ports, the two side ports in the stores. And we're going to check in there, make sure that there's a gasket present, otherwise it'll likely leak when we charge the hydrant. You can put that port back on, pop that off, again check the gasket, make sure that that's there. You can put that back on, make sure it's tight, those two points are lined up. And then you can check your final port. And again, you see that there's a gasket in there. After that, we'll remove one of the side ports, whichever one works better for you. And this is where we're going to install our gauge. Okay. So here's the gauge and the adapter that you'll be using. They're relatively fragile, so if they get dropped, they can break fairly easily. These gauges are not real durable. Here's how you control the water flow. When you're charging the hydrant, you're going to have this arrow pointing out. That's going to blow the air and the water out. We'll usually flush it for a minute or two, at least until that red and brown water kind of clears up and it starts to turn a little whiter. Then once that's happened, you can switch it to there and that'll shut the flow off. You'll notice your gauge go up a little bit, but then when you do that, that'll show you the full pressure on your gauge that you're getting at that hydrant. All right, once the gauge is installed, we're gonna make sure we got the flow going this way because we don't want a bunch of air hitting the gauge there. Then we're gonna fully charge the hydrant all the way up, and again, let it flow for a little while, flush some of that dirty water out of there, because ideally the gauge will have cleaner water getting into it. It'll extend the lifespan of the gauge. Next step, we're going to charge the hydrant and get it fully charged. As we do this is going to begin to expel air. That'll be relatively loud. You can plug your ears, but if you're tough, you don't have to, as long as you don't mind hearing loss. But the loud noise is normal. All right, so once you have water flow, you'll notice the hydrant loosens up as the pressure equalizes in there, but you'll want to open it all the way. Any debris down in that bottom boot can get stuck in the main valve rubber, and that can keep the hydrant from shutting off. So that's why we open them all the way. Hopefully leave enough space for any debris to settle. All right, so now the hydrant's open all the way. And do that, that shuts the flow off. And then if I turn that valve another 90 degrees, we got our pressure on the gauge, and it looks like our pressure is right about 64 pounds. So that's the pressure that we would record at this hydrant. Of course, we'd also make note of the leaking stores adapter here. And if something like that was going on, again, the water department could come out and get a new stores adapter on that and get that fixed. So the next step, we usually like to let it run while we shut it down, and that way you can tell really if you get a good shutdown or not. You can also watch the gauge, and you'll notice if it goes down real quick, that's usually a pretty good shutdown because you're creating a vacuum in there. So you can see it's beginning to shut down now. And the hydrant, you'll see, is loose here. That's a good shutdown. You don't actually have to crank it down. If it's stopped running, you can leave it nice and loose. That makes for easier operation next time around. And because we don't have any water flowing out of there, we can pull our gauge off. Try not to drop it because it can break. And usually we'll have a look inside, just make sure that the hydrant's begun to drain. That's a properly functioning hydrant. Again, we want all the water out of there so it doesn't freeze in the winter. Finally, you reinstall your port here. Make sure it's tight. And check the other ports, make sure they're still on there nice and tight. And then you're ready to record all the data that you've captured. All right, so you may have observed in that video that the gauge hadn't actually dropped down. If that happens, you can just fiddle with this and hopefully that'll drop it down. I had to put the water pressure back on the gauge, open it to atmosphere through here, and that I was able to drop it down. If with these steps you're unable to get the gauge to drop, it's probably broken and you'll have to get a new one. Okay. All right, so with fire hydrants, there are a few common issues to look for. Obviously, when you're loosening those ports, you're checking those gaskets to make sure they're not going to leak. Also, if you notice that those ports are naturally tight, you can apply some anti-seize on those, and that or graphite, and that'll usually loosen them up and keep them loose for a while. In addition, if you do notice water coming out of the hydrant, either out of the ports, out of the bonnet here, or down out of this base, make note of that, and the water department can come out and replace any gaskets or O-rings that are faulty. Finally, when you're shutting the hydrant off, if you notice that it doesn't shut down all the way and there's still some water running out or consistently, that usually means that it's not shutting off. You can make note of that and the water department will come down and replace the main valve rubber down the bottom of the hydrant. And finally, if you got to a hydrant and it was already charged and it wasn't shutting off, again, just leave it be. Water department can come out and shut the foot valve off, and that'll usually require a full hydrant replacement. And then also, if there's anything that I haven't mentioned but just makes you question whether or not the hydrant's running properly, just feel free to make a note of it, and we can come out and have an inspection. All right, so the final step of the hydrant inspection program is the data capture. This is where the actual inventory portion comes in. So for our purposes, trying to fix these, we have to get the right parts. So we usually like to get the make and model. So this one, the make, is an American Darling. The model's not always as easy to find. This one's a B62B, and that says that right there. But if you're unable to find out what the model is, if you can just grab a make, and based on what's stamped on there, we can probably get enough information to figure out the parts that we'll need. In addition, we like the year of manufacture. That's usually easier to find. This one was made in 1995. And if it does have a size, majority are 5 1/4. There are some older M&H 129s that are 4 1/2 inches, and those ones you'll notice they're a lot smaller. We're trying to get rid of those though, and oftentimes they'll be broken, so they end up getting replaced anyways. And that's the data you'll capture on this. In addition, we do make note if whether or not the hydrant has a stores adapter. Hopefully, as this program progresses, we'll be able to get stores adapters installed on more of the hydrants in the city. So in addition, in the water department, we use this laptop to capture the data that we find and record it all, and that way we keep an inventory of every hydrant in the city. Sounds like in the fire department you might be using sheets of paper and then having somebody then transcribe those into the computer. But that way we are able to make sure that all the work we get done is recorded. All right, so in order to actually track and maintain this program, we've come up with a system in order to capture all the data that we produce. You'll be provided with half sheets of paper that will have the data that you'll need. It'll have a portion for make, model, year of manufacture, whether or not there's a stores, the PSI that you record on the gauge, and the hydrant condition overall, and we can go over kind of the nuances of that. And then in addition, there's a large notes section on there that you'll be able to take any notes, and that's where the water department will take over to figure out what we need to do to get repairs done. So GIS has assigned every hydrant in the city with a specific number, and we'll take care of that on the end of the data entry, and that number will be over here. This number is what we used in our initial collection. In addition, you'll capture the location of the hydrant based on nearest address and location. So for instance, this hydrant was at 11121 Willows Road Northeast, and it's northeast of the building and actually on Willows Road. And the way that data is captured is really up to the person's best discernment who's out there doing the work. Again, we have the manufacturer of the hydrant, the model, and the manufacture date here. We're no longer capturing the buries, so don't worry about that. We write our PSI in there, whether or not the hydrant has a stores, and the hydrant condition, and we've kind of narrowed it down to good, operable, and inoperable. So good is green. If it was to be operable, that means there's some issue. Maybe it's got a leak, but if there was a fire, it would suffice, but it's not 100%. So a lot of them will end up being operable, and that's in the yellow. That's any issue with the hydrant or with the foot valve, and those are the ones that we'll go out and try to fix. And then obviously red, inoperable, those are the ones that we'll fix immediately as soon as we get the chance. And that would be any major issue. The hydrant doesn't turn on or the hydrant doesn't turn off, and it's not safe to operate. Finally, we just capture the inspection date on there, and then if, say, one of these hydrants was operable or inoperable, notes section is where you would enter the problems that you found with it. All right, well, thanks for your time today. That concludes our hydrant inspection video. Of course, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to Mike Navarro. He's been working with me on this. In addition, you can contact me. My current phone number is 206-200-1898, or you can email me. That's mlmatthews@redmond.gov, and that's mlmatthews@redmond.gov. Thanks. And good luck out there.